I'm John Del Vecchio at Street Skills, and welcome to session number 5 of Cornering Confidence. My goal for this 30-minute live stream is to have a Q&A session on Cornering Confidence, chapters 9 and 10, line selection and cornering. Please post your chat questions or clarifications regarding these techniques and your experience practicing. I see Jeremy's back, and this is great. I can see right in the same console everybody's postings. Now, as people kind of come in, I just want to start with lines or your cornering path through the curve. Clearly, good riders know they have to have a strategy for getting through a curve. It's motorcycling 101. A proper line provides the best traction, vision, and space cushion for the margin of error there. That is what our goals are. Now, what I like to discuss with lines and where I kind of start this whole thing is that we have real world and ideal or perfect world lines. I used ideal because it kind of goes along with real, rhymes sort of that the phonetic sound of it I like better than perfect world, real world. But the ideal world line is a line that provides maximum traction, vision, and space cushion under perfect conditions. Real world lines, they provide maximum traction, vision, and space cushion under imperfect riding conditions. And so we're likely to kind of experience both on our next ride. Now, just to give you a quick example of what we're talking about here, ideal versus real world. How you doing? Frank's in the chat. Thanks, bud. Good to see you. The green line here would be an ideal or planned line. In most resources, courses, classes that you take, whatever that you do to improve your cornering skills, they're going to give you a plan. They're going to help you execute the plan from basic training classes all the way up through the best finesse cornering classes out there. Where I think some might be a little lacking is how we can make adjustments for the real world. And this shows you a pretty good example. Now, normally if this car wasn't an oncoming car, we might take this outside, inside, outside path there. However, if the car is kind of coming, we might want to create a little bit of a buffer there. And we might enter here on the inside, and then when the car passes, kind of change our line. You see, we can kind of end up at the same point. And these are the types of things that I'm trying to help people develop, is the real world versus the ideal world, because you're going to get confidence if you can adjust for those changes. You're going to have real limited confidence if you plan a corner and it doesn't go according to plan goes out the window, now what? And that's when people get into those pucker moments and start to have trouble. One of the main things I like to, again, start with on this particular chapter 9 line selection, we talked about your cornering speed, and that your pre-corner speed has the most influence over the resulting line. For example, in this picture here, at 55 miles an hour, we are going to be perhaps pushed out. 25 miles an hour, maybe this is a 25 mile an hour curve, we can more make that we're more likely to make that turn. Remember that the higher the speed, the slighter the arc must be. The slower the speed, the sharper the arc can be, which means it doesn't have to be this arc. We could, at a slower speed, take this wider or slighter arc if we wanted to. And this is a fundamental principle when we're cornering we really need to understand. Now, I do explain things a little bit differently to my students than the basic rider course and even advanced rider courses. here I just basically, instead of talking entry, apex, exit parts of the corner, and those are legitimate places in the turn, I call it a pre-curve, in-curve, and post-curve. And I talk about the in-curve area as being a free movement zone. You should feel confident, comfortable moving around perhaps inside that area. And for perhaps cornering positioning benefits, or if you have to avoid something that might be in the way. Now, when I teach people to plan their lines, I also will simplify things. I will have we have an outside-inside pre area and an inside-outside post, and we try to stitch these together as best we can. And I call that zone targeting, just to kind of put some words to the idea. But we come on in, and we kind of shoot for that target, either the inside or the outside. It just makes it kind of a little bit more easier to hit those targets. And the next thing I really want to talk about was real world adjustments. And one of the main things that I really want to, I guess, convince people to think is that you have to get past the idea that you have to have the whole corner figured out at the beginning, right? And that if you don't figure it out here, well, then you're in trouble. That is true to a certain extent, but you gotta embrace the idea that you're going to make adjustments to this line. And so, for example, we could be coming in, this is the line we plan, but maybe we're getting a little too close. So we want to change our line in this direction here, give us a little bit more room. Or there's something in the road at the apex. I want to get around at the corner apex. And maybe I want to change my line here. There could be other reasons why. Maybe we feel somewhere here we're getting a little too close to the center line. We want to bring it in a little bit. Maybe there's an oncoming car. And I like to provide not only the idea that you should want to change your cornering line and for a real world adjustment, but you need to know how to do it. And so let's talk about some of the ways that you can adjust your cornering line. Let's start with how I would change this line here. There's a couple different ways. Why don't I throw it out there, see if people can maybe answer this. How can I change this line here? What are two ways? And sometimes there's a little bit of lag in the chat, but there's really two ways that I can make this a slighter versus the sharper line that I'm on. Yes, Frank, excellent. That's exactly right. This is, a lot of what's in my program, is basic knowledge that I've brought in to make my specific formula. But this particular maneuver, the oscillation maneuver, that is, something that I kind of feel is maybe a little bit, proprietary, something that I have, brought to the forefront as a skill that expert cornering people should think about. And so basically just a light swerve without moving any other body part. We're just in the corner, we're kissing the mirror, and we can just sort of do that light swerve on the bars in this direction towards the outside, and exactly that's exactly it. And then we have I believe it's Throttle. I hope I'm saying that correctly. With the other way that we can increase our cornering arc or slighten, make it wider, is to add throttle. So if I add throttle here, that will force me on a outside sort of path. Now the front brake would over here perhaps bring us in, or we can we could roll off the throttle to change that line as well. And so you guys are getting it. Hopefully, this is something that you've been practicing out there, on the road. But we just getting the idea, in your head that you can make those adjustments in the corner. Now, what I really tell people, I'm just going to go take you through before I go for some questions. If you have a question, throw it in there. But what I want to just do maybe before going on to the next part of the session with cornering is go over the action steps and the action items that you can do when you're practicing your lines. Now, when it comes to just planning your ideal line, just shoot for different lines. Inside to inside, outside to outside, inside to outside, outside to inside. And try your various lines as you go through your curves, whether they're tighter or sweepers or whatnot. Try and get that taken care of. Just practicing your plan. And the good news is most of the time our plan works out just fine, and there's no issues. That's the goal anyway, that we can execute. Now, there is one other thing that I want to point out about adjusting our lines. In this particular chapter 9, the goal is to make adjustments to your line for positioning benefits, just practicing. For example, if we were to come in this direction and our head were hanging over, we might want to just get a positioning benefit of changing our line here to give us a little more distance. Or like I showed with this earlier one, we might want to just do this for a positioning benefit. This isn't a hazard avoidance situation. This is just giving us that greater space. All right, but we don't want to give up traction either. We have to kind of have a compromise between these things. Now, I saw a question come in. Frank says, when oscillating, do you keep body in the same position, kissing the same mirror, or should you go side to side and kiss the other mirror? Okay, so I want you to think about the oscillation maneuver as is kind of like a swerve in a straight line, but you're basically leaned over, and we want to be delicate with that. Just like you would if you're taking the MSF class or you're swerving in a straight line, you don't want to be abrupt. You want to, do that upper body independent of motorcycle lean. We want to keep the upper body straighter. If we're in the turn, the oscillation maneuver, we don't do anything. We just rotate. We just oscillate those bars, push and pull on the bars, and we don't move anything else. So that's a very important point with the oscillation. Try doing those on sweepers, and you can even do them in a straight line. What I will do sometimes when I'm with my coaching tours, just going in a straight line, I'll get into kiss the mirror body position, and with a press, I can keep going straight, and you can actually practice oscillating just by moving those bars in a straight line, which we talk about pre-positioning our body to tip in the cornering chapter. There is another technique that I talk about it's on page 53 of the book, and it's under the techniques for changing our line, is shifting our shoulders. So sometimes we can actually use some leverage to shift our shoulders, which will change the lean angle of the motorcycle, which will steer the motorcycle also along with the handlebars. And you might see this when you watch MotoGP racers or any Moto America, any racer. You can actually see if they're converging on each other. One will abruptly is a bad way to put it, but one will sort of like shift their body and their handlebars to change their lines so that they don't run into each other. And that's one that you might have to feel. I have videos of each of these techniques in the online course. But oscillations, it's probably one of the most fun things that people say they enjoyed when we do the coaching tours. They said, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know that you could just do slight pushing and pull maneuvers on the bar to change that line. Jeremy said that always practice that while going straight. Yeah, it's very easy to do. You can actually get into a cornering position and still go straight as long as you're pressing that outside grip. It's going to hold you on that line, and that's very good, Jeremy. When we're talking about going into the corner, entering on the next chapter. So that's generally lines, and I will say this: I'm ambitious, trying to talk about lines and cornering and answer your questions in the same 30-minute period, because this is sort of, we're now starting to get into the real, the heart of sort of why we did chapters 1 through 8, the subtle moves, the subtle hand movements and controls and that kind of thing, to now take it with the cognitive planning and adjusting those lines. We're kind of marrying those two ideas together. And then, of course, cornering, it's the title of the book, Cornering Confidence. And so for the second chapter we're going to talk about right now, you're going to see it's very, very difficult to write one chapter on cornering. But I think I basically covered what I wanted to for the line selection. So it is a form of counter steering. One of the things that I like to tell people about counter steering, or kind of the idea that I have about counter steering, in order to teach someone what counter steering is, you tell them to press in the opposite direction, press down and away the opposite direction, and it will initiate the turn. You soon have to go press the opposite direction, or you'll just keep falling over. But soon after, what we should do is it should just be muscle memory. And now to position the motorcycle, we'll be pressing in those directions without really thinking about it. And I think that counter steering, is that word that people, like to kind of bring up as how you turn a motorcycle. And it is true, but I think it's just a term used to kind of help wire the brain to the hands for pressing into the direction that you want to initiate the lean. And that is very effective. It's the best way to steer a motorcycle is with counter steering. I mean, I talk a lot about kissing the mirror and our weight inside the motorcycle center line, our chest center line. That is going to help us aid in the turn. But the best way to turn a motorcycle is with the handlebars. Be it at normal speeds above, let's say, 12, 15 miles an hour, we're going to press in the direction we want to go, or we're going to steer at lower speeds in a parking lot. That was great. So if you do have any other questions, you might want to put them up there, but I'd like to move on to cornering. And this is an important, I guess, little spiel that I'm about to say here with the remaining part of our time together tonight, in that cornering well is really complex, obviously. And what I'm trying to do with Cornering Confidence is simplify the process for the sport rider. Yes, this stuff will work for someone who wants to cruise around, take it slow. These techniques are going to be fantastic for that rider as well, but it's a very complex subject that many people have written books about, and I'm just trying to simplify the process on a method that I found works. So the way many riders tend to cope with this complexity is by slowing down excessively, which requires them to roll on or transition from brake to throttle at the entry point. Now, I have a little drawing to kind of explain things, but excuse me. What I mean by this is if you took a basic rider course, slow look press roll, slow look lean roll, there's different ways you can explain this 4-step sequence. The book, I talk about how it's really 2 parts, not 4 steps. But generally speaking, we have to slow the motorcycle, look in the direction we want to go, press the grip in the direction of our turn, okay, counter steer if you will, and then roll on the throttle. These things must happen for you to make it through that turn. All right, hands down, that's the sequence. Now, there could be variations of that. We might start to roll on and then have to slow because we're going wide. But this is the general principle, whether you are riding basic riding or sport riding. And let's take a quick look here. At the 25 mile an hour versus the 55 mile an hour rider entering this turn. Now, at a faster pace, the basic slow look press roll technique will not work. For example, let's say I'm coming in to this turn at 25 miles an hour and it's a 30 mile an hour turn, just for the sake of argument. If I don't get all my braking done here, let's just say I'm done braking here, I need to get on the throttle here at the entry point of the turn. I have to make a brake to throttle transition here. If I don't, I won't make the turn. I'll actually go into, let's say, the ditch or whatever. So if you're going very slow, yes, this is appropriate. We must brake to throttle transition, or let's say you use 4 fingers. So you come in, you brake, and then you release the brakes. You get all your braking done, and your hands are on your hands curled on the grip here, and you roll on that throttle. At a basic riding pace, slower, it's going to be the case. Now, at a faster pace, let's say 55 miles an hour, the basic technique will not work. We can't let off the brake at the entry point, because if we do, it's going to careen us. Our speed is going to send us on a wider arc than we want to. That's why we want to want to stay on the brakes and slow past the entry point of the turn and make our transition when we are happy with our speed and direction. Generally is the phrasing that you can remember. So this person's happy with their speed and direction here to roll on. This person's not going to be happy with their speed until they get here in the direction that they're pointing out as well. Now, it all has to do with timing. That's it. The basic rider, the sport rider, no different. I'll also go as far as to say that there are times when you might be sport riding and you're trail braking or you're going faster into the turns. Well, sometimes you're going to find out, we got held up behind a car, so we're really going slow into this turn. And so you're going to transition from brake to throttle here on that same ride. And it's when you are happy. Now, just to kind of stir the pot a little bit, if we go in at let's say 65, we might not make the transition until here. We might have to brake all the way through to here. And that's kind of the thing that I want to impart as far as the brake throttle transition. I call it the secret weapon. It's that we want to transition from brake to throttle at the right time. And if we let off here at 55, if we're going 55 miles an hour on this particular line and we let off here, we're in for a real treat between here and the sharpest part of that turn. And so we want to remember to try to hold off on that and then trail brake off. I mean, if you think about it, trail braking even happens here, right? You shouldn't just, let's say I'm braking into this corner conservatively at 25 miles an hour. I shouldn't just dump the brakes, right? I should release the brake smoothly in a measured way, just like I would if I were leaned over. It's just that when we're in a straight line, we can be more ham-fisted with releasing the brake and adding throttle. Whereas here, when we're leaned over, this is the difference now, right? We're upright here. Once we get into the corner, we're leaned, so we could have more trouble if we go to make that transition out. But basically, as long as you're using brake, throttle, transition, secret weapon, you're trail braking anyways wherever you are making that transition. You can throw up any questions you have, put up, I should say. Now, while you're thinking about that, I just want to talk a little bit about traction. And this is an important thing that I like to also bring to people's attention about their tires, right? So the tire makes friction and traction on the road in many different ways, several different ways. And we can have stickier rubber. It can be a warmer day. The surface can be warmer. And so there's things outside of our control at that particular moment. We're going to have to consider what can we do as the rider to give ourselves better traction under any circumstance. And that's where cornering confidence sort of focuses on behaviors of the rider to get more traction. Now, we have adhesion, which is stickiness. If it's wet, sandy, whatever, we can't get the stickiness. And so we have to use mechanical keying and deformation by pressing the tire into the roadway surface to give ourselves that good grip. The only thing that really does this is weight. The only thing that helps with that mechanical keying is weight. And by the way, when we do weight the tire, the adhesion properties are better improved, because if we can spread out the contact patch a little wider, we're going to have more rubber adhering, more rubber interlocking, and that's going to give us our traction. Now, where this comes into play going into this turn, if I'm coming in at 25 miles an hour and I go to change direction, I'm going to probably have extra traction in reserve to make that happen, and it's not that big a deal at this speed. But if I'm coming in at 55 miles an hour and I let off all my brakes in a straight line and then I release the brakes, what I'm doing is I'm coming in, I'm pressing the tire into the pavement, and right when I'm about to ask this tire to change direction, if I release the brake, it's going to lift the rubber out of the pavement, and now we're gliding along the tops of the pavement. We don't maybe have that nice lush contact patch gripping in there, grinding in there with mechanical deformation to make this turn. And imagine you're going 55 miles an hour, you release the brake here, the rebound effect of the suspension potentially lifts weight off that tire as you need it, and now that's how you can easily tuck the front as you go in. And so we want to make sure that if we're riding at a faster pace, ladies and gentlemen, make sure that you're trail braking and you're holding the brakes so that you're weighting that tire on the way in and then doing that roll-on transition here. Because, boy, you've probably had some pretty dicey moments going from totally upright to making it past the first half of the curve before you exit, if you haven't been doing the trail braking. I mean, God, I can't believe that for many years, I actually would go through this curve without my fingers in the secret weapon hand position, trail braking in. Even if I release it, I may want to add a little bit more. I mean, I have this wonderful tool at my disposal, the secret weapon, the key to cornering confidence. And there I was, entering this turn with my hand fully wrapped around that grip, because hey, I'd finished my braking. Now it's time to get my hand on that throttle. And so you might want to also think, if you're out there when you're using two fingers on that brake lever, try to reflect a little bit on when you do release. Are you using two fingers but releasing it before you tip in? That's possible. So try to make sure that you're kind of holding on until you're happy with your speed and direction. Now, trying to see where my notes take me. Never was much of a trail breaker, but since watching your videos, I've been giving it a go. It definitely helps make all the corners feel very controllable. Jeremy, it's one of those things where I just don't know how I rode at a faster pace without this technique, without using the trail braking technique, brake to throttle transitions. I use it pulling into my driveway. I use it basically anywhere I'm riding. And one of the things too, I'll even use it in parking lots. And people say, well, never use your front brake as you're doing low speed maneuvers. You want a friction zone, a little bit of throttle, maybe drag the rear brake. Those are all excellent for low speed maneuvers. I know that that's a whole area of study on its own. But I'm using my front brake going through through parking lots and things like that because I don't grab at that brake. And, it is more sensitive if your bars are turned, but I just use it all the time. It's instant reaction time to control that speed and direction. So Frank has a question here. It says, when you're braking, roll it down, is throttle completely closed? So here's how I'm just going to review again what I consider the roll it up technique in the roll it down technique. The brake throttle transition default hand position is just gripping the throttle, putting these two fingers on the brake lever, resting. So I'm not using throttle or brake. The roll it up technique is I roll off the throttle. Okay, it's closed when it's in a default position as I add my brakes, and I kind of roll my wrist up and squeeze in a downward direction. How this might work entering a curve, Frank, is I'm on the throttle, no brakes, and I roll it up, which forces me to roll off the throttle, and then I add my brake once the throttle is closed. Now, once I get to my transition point, I'm releasing the brake lever, brakes are fully released, and then I roll down the throttle, rolling on the throttle. And I do like to point out that you don't have to go directly from brake to throttle and throttle to brake. You might have a brake to coast, engine braking, from brake to coast to throttle, and that's also part of the activities that I have people do in the courses that I teach. So I hope that answered your question there. I will see if there's a couple more questions. I'm probably a couple minutes over now. I probably got maybe 5 or so minutes left to keep these kind of relatively short here. Try to see if I covered everything I wanted to. There was one other thing that I'd like to maybe pique your interest if you haven't read my book or taken my online course yet. But there is sort of two misconceptions about what to do if you go into a corner too fast. And I have a lot of discussions about this with people. And if you were to ask your buddies at the coffee shop or in your riding club or whatever, what do you do if you get into a corner too fast? So let's say you realize here at the apex of the corner you're going too fast and you're starting to run wide. What do you do? And most people will revert to what they learned in their basic rider course, which says you press more, counter steer, if you will, Frank, in the direction you want to go. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that will work potentially. It's likely to work in many cases because you may need to lean more to counteract the forces to make that turn and to actually have the motorcycle do what you want it to do. But that is not, in my opinion, the best and definitely not the only way to do this. First of all, if I press more to make this turn, I am now pressing and it's giving me more lean angle. And it goes against the straight principle. It's more likely for me to lose traction if the more I lean, right? I'm not going to get worse traction by leaning more, but if I lose traction, it's going to be harder for me to regain traction the more leaned over I get. And what I will reiterate time and time again in my program is that there are that you can actually brake, so we can roll off the throttle here. That's what I have people do as an action item in the chapter on cornering, is I just have you sort of go past the entry point. You can be off the brakes and just engine brake to see what happens to your speed. Going to slow you down here. That's another way. So we can actually use braking. We can straighten the motorcycle and go into a straighter path. There's things that we can do other than press more, and I get to those in the book. One other thing too, I did mention just a second ago, is that another misconception. So the first misconception I was talking about there that's in the book is you counter steering more, pressing more is the only way to make a turn. The other one is that that higher speeds require more lean angle, which is true if the rider's body were to stay in the center. All right. So what I can do is, if we kiss the mirror, we can actually get an effective lean that's less than if we were in the center line of the motorcycle. So the straight principle through the turn will help you gain that ground clearance stability and lean angle and reserve if you need to change direction. And let's see here. That really that whipped right through that 30 minutes. I want to thank you for your time and coming in today. I still see we have several folks in here, and I'm going to wrap this up by saying thanks for joining me tonight. It's never too late to pick up a copy of Cornering Confidence or enroll in my online course. Visit Cornering Confidence for more information. Be sure to follow me on social media. And next Tuesday, I will see you for the final stream, number 6, which brings in chapters 11 and 12, trail braking and handling cornering hazards. If you have any questions about my program, please don't hesitate to ask. Drop me an email, and I'd be more than happy to explain what I'm teaching. And have a good week. See you next time.